What's good, Brookago? This is Kahlief here. What the deal be? I'm here today with our PS5 review. Massive love to our folks over at Sony for sending us not only a huge care package of all the accessories, the camera, the chargers, another DualSense, but of course the PS5. It has been a really interesting couple of weeks getting a chance to have some hands-on with the system. There's a lot of conversation about what next gen is supposed to be, and what next gen is going to be from the kind of console perspective between the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. And I feel like both systems are doing a really good job of making their case for why they should get your money this holiday season and kind of into the future. I think those things are really important, really interesting. I think this review is not going to go really deep into things like thermals and like what how much does it weigh and all those kinds of small things. I don't necessarily care about that stuff, and I think again those things are handled really well from the folks from Digital Foundry. You're going to see them do all the work of doing all the how fast does a game run? Is it hitting 40 frames per second? Is it going to do all that kind of stuff? I think if you have a really nice TV, if you have a 4K TV that can take the advantage of 4K visuals at 60 frames, you're going to be in a good position when you have an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5. And the PS5 specifically has some really cool bells and whistles that I think that go past just the visuals and go into a space that is actually a little bit different in the ways that we would think about why a system is important, or why a system is doing something different, because not just the normal, like how many teraflops is it doing, all that kind of stuff, which I think is important from a gearhead perspective. But from a take it home, open the box, what do you have an expectation for? That's what this review is going to be about more than anything else today. So one of the things that I initially, when you open up the box, I think is a really beautiful testament to is the design. I think the design is actually pretty brilliant. I know a lot of folks have clowned on it and said, this is the first console that has a popped collar and all this other kind of stuff. And there's been all these kind of jabs taken at it that I think have been really interesting and funny. But it is, I think, a testament to the folks over at Sony to say, we're going to do something different. We're going to make sure this thing is going to be a visual masterpiece inside your home. I think it changes a lot of the aesthetic of where you want this thing to live, not only because of the size of the console, which is huge. If you saw our unboxing video, you could see that for sure. But from a, visual statement in your living room of like, is this going to be the centerpiece from a visual standpoint of what your, TV console, unit is going to look like? I think there's a conversation there to say that they are probably going for that, with not only just going out of the box with a non-black console, but something that is big and bold in a lot of different ways from a design standpoint. I think is pretty brilliant in lots of different ways. The other thing that I think is actually what is going to be the biggest boon and the biggest actual advantage that Sony will have in this generation is really around the controller. I think the DualSense controller is and can be the revolution of what we think of when it comes to tactile input functions on a new system, or in the video game space in a real way. I think I have played a couple of things already that have made me decide that there may be some games that I get, or at least when the conversation happens about like what things do we want to review, what games do we want to kind of poke at, what things are going to happen. A new part of the conversation that I always ask PR from our perspective is there going to be any DualSense functionality that I need to think about, or that you can share with me that I want to be able to tackle and pay attention to? It will probably result in me asking for multiple copies of games from public relations now to say, that's an actual tangible thing that I want to determine is going to be something that I care about, or if it is a thing I care about in the process of reviewing games now going forward. I think, haptic feedback and the way that they've done this kind of super directional rumble is very, very different in a way that I did not expect. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later in the review, because I wanted to poke at it really quickly, because I think it is the actual thing that will when you get home be a thing that you care about as a player. I don't know, again, if we're going just by specs, that is going to be the thing that matters the most to most people. Again, PS5 is at a small detriment in terms of actual raw horsepower. But I think that the thing that the DualSense and the way that people will use it to give you different kinds of experiences may trump all of that in a bigger way than we've even been able to actually see so far. So that's going to be a really interesting part of the conversation. I do want to dig through something that I think is actually important from a, you get it home, you open it up and pop open the box kind of deal. I think that the conversation around, the controller is one thing. I do also think that the UI is a big thing. I think that them changing up their UI from a initial standpoint just makes the thing feel different. It just makes the PlayStation experience feel new. It can't be understated that when you pop open a box for the first time, when you plug in your console, you have two expectations. You have an expectation to see and hear what the kind of opening sound is and the opening visuals for when that happens, when you plug it in for the first time. But you also have this expectation for things to kind of look different than what you're used to having. And Sony has done a fairly good job of doing some of that work already. Again, I don't think this is full. This will be like the version 1 of the UI that you'll probably get as soon as you plug in your PlayStation 5. But I do think that there are some pretty brilliant and smart things they've done with the way that they've done the switcher, the way you multitask with certain things. I think those things have been really nice and clean and work really well in that way. I do love the way that they've kind of made all those things given to you at a glance, which I think is actually pretty important and good. Even from a visuals perspective within some of the menus too, all of it has just a really nice look to it. It feels like they took the time to pay attention to aesthetics in a way that is nice. It feels sexy in that way. I do think that they've done a good job of putting things in places that feel similar while also adding some extra, not bells and whistles, but actually some extra menus to things that, used to take a couple more extra jumps to get to. You'll be comfortable to understand where things live, which I think is great. But they've done some really just small things that make sense. Like they've put like all the audio inputs things together where where they're going to go. And they've added some extra menus and functions there as well, to your input device for your headset. That thing will dynamically change based on whatever that thing is supposed to be and where it's kind of pushing out from. I think some of that stuff is an actual smart thing to do. It actually changes the way that you think about, how you're going to engage with the system in ways that are small. But again, you're going to be digging into these things in a really long time, for a while, because those things are just going to be in there. One of the actual things I thought was interesting, and you're seeing it on screen now, is that now you can record in 4K when it comes to the way you want to manually record some of your capture material, game capture stuff. I thought that was actually pretty dope. I didn't know that they were going to be able to move and have that bump in resolution when you were going to do that stuff. Again, the game preset stuff of how do you want your games to kind of automatically just talk to you through the systems that they have? Do you always want captioning on? Do you always want to be in a first or third person perspective? What difficulty do you want to be on as the default for what you want those things to be in the beginning? I think that those are small changes, but they're thoughtful ones. They actually show that the user is at the forefront of thought when you're having these things together. I think those are actually pretty brilliant and smart. I think it's a small thing, but it actually makes a lot of sense. One other thing I did think was actually pretty cool was the fact that for a lot of your games, when you dig into them for the first time, they have these cards that come up, and you saw this during one of the presentations that they did during a state of play. I think it actually is pretty cool that not only does it give you information that's kind of what you got on the PS4, but I think it's actually more useful. So things like things like trophies and where those things live, you'll get a little bit more information about where, you can go from game to game. Actually, one of the things that I really loved about the card system on the PlayStation 5 is that, and I think I had a video somewhere in here. I don't know if I have it in this particular package, but I remember being in a game, it's playing Astro Boy. And Astro Boy has multiple levels in it. And one of the cards was one in which it would basically like instantly tell me that I could resume from one of the specific places that was in the game. It wasn't like I had to go into game first, dig through the menus, like go through the overworld map, and then just go and then like hit the button to get there. It was literally like a couple of those cards had different places where I could resume my game, and you hit the button and you're instantly into where you left off in those places, in those games, which I thought was pretty sweet. Again, they had that conversation about like, are you having trouble finding a thing in a game? If you're a completionist, you're like, I don't know where these, pigeons are, or all this other stuff may be, and I don't know where they live. How do I get to those things? It'll give you some like, you're in this section of the game. Here's some ways that you can go through the process of completing it. I think a lot of folks didn't think that was going to be a thing that they wanted, but I do feel like it's going to be something that actually has a purpose and makes sense and actually gives you a better way to play the games that you currently do. Some small things that I think are pretty interesting from a UI perspective is, when you get a trophy, and we saw this, Greg Miller talked about this, in your captures folder, you'll see a picture of the moment that you had with a little trophy icon and a little, like little splash on the bottom of the UI or of the picture. Nice little flares like that, I think are pretty interesting and pretty cool. And I like that kind of stuff. Again, games feel smooth. Everything is beautiful. The 3D audio stuff is actually pretty interesting as well. I've been using Astro A20s to play games on both my Xbox Series X and my PS5. And the 3D audio stuff actually does have a fairly good, it does actually feel like it is impactful in a way that is tangible. It does feel like you're hearing things a different way, and you're pulling in smaller, flavors of audio that you don't really usually get within games. It feels like the dynamic range of audio is a little bit bigger in that way as well, which I thought was pretty cool to finally feel like that's exactly what they're trying to hit. Again, games are super quick to load. I've been playing basically 2 games really on it that are next gen games. I'm playing another one, but I can't talk about it yet because of embargo. But I've been playing a lot of Spider-Man Miles Morales. Again, check out the review that we just did, so you get a good idea of what some of that stuff is. Been playing a whole bunch of Miles Morales for sure, and that's been, again, like I said in my review, if there is one game that you need to get at launch on PS5's launch, it is that game. I think that game is pretty brilliant in what it does from a visual and gameplay standpoint. I think the other game that comes basically loaded onto the system is Astro Boy. And Astro Boy, it's an interesting thing. It really does give you an idea of why the DualSense controller, again, is the thing to care about when it comes to your PlayStation 5. It definitely shows you, not only through the rumble, but through small things like, usually, your controller sounds are annoying. It's a thing you kind of hate because it just is a thing that chirps all the time. But it is a thing that when it works well, it works really well. It's a thing that actually feels like a new version of immersion in a lot of different ways. Actually, there's one video that I want to show you that I think brings that home in a real way. I think this might be it. So, in Astro Boy, there's this section where you get this kind of pachinko machine. And in the pachinko machine, you get these small orbs, and these small orbs kind of come down into your hand. Now, when you pull down on the trigger, it locks at the halfway point because it's like this arm on a slot machine. And it locks in this position where you can't move it until you like actually put some force on it to actually pull down the lever in a way that replicates exactly what you would have if you had like a kind of clunky, rusty gasket in something that gives you some resistance on it. And then on the other trigger, when you're breaking open the orbs, it has not only a sound, but it has tension on it, so that it feels like you're actually breaking that orb with the hand that's on the screen. It's a small thing, but it is something that really you don't understand how game changing that can possibly be if implemented correctly within some games. It is a thing that you're just like, well, I didn't know that that was an actual thing that I could feel in a controller. I didn't know that was a thing that I could actually understand was a different tactile experience just holding the controller that you kind of know and understand already. You know, again, it looks really similar, but it has this different function in the way that it works based on the software and based on the way that the developer has intended, that will give you something that is very, very different. You know, I was talking about it in our Spider-Man review, you know, hearing the thwip of you kind of shooting your webs out, or feeling the tension when a web hits a wall and you're grabbing and swinging with it through the controller. It is something that is very, very profound. And again, depending upon who implements it and how they implement it and how they do it well, you know, these are just the first couple of games that we're seeing this stuff happen with. And you'll feel it in other stuff. I'm feeling it in other games already that I'm playing for review. And it's pretty remarkable. I'm not going to lie and say that that's not the case. It gives me more excitement to see who are the folks who are going to go wild with it, to see where we land when it comes to the DualSense as the kind of main attraction for your PS5 experience, which I think it actually is. You know, the games are going to be the games. They'll have their first party titles that will be using that stuff in a really probably dynamic way. But it will really be interesting to see what happens in the third party space when you have games that are on both systems and you have that functionality that's in that controller might be the thing that makes you change the reason why you would get that on an Xbox versus a PS5. So it's a really cool tech. It's really cool tech. I can't even front on that in any real way. It is something that I did not have an expectation to say like, well, okay, it's going to be whatever it's going to be. They are doing some really cool stuff with the PlayStation 5 controller, with the DualSense, for sure. I'm more excited to see what's going to be happening in there once the store goes live, because I want to see how they're treating that new space. I'm excited to see what happens when they start digging into more stuff with 3D audio. I have the headset, the Sony headset. I need to actually play around with that because I've been using the H1s to see if there's any difference in the way that they do audio through that device in conjunction with the Sony PlayStation 5. But for the most part, I'm having a blast. They all the stuff that they talked about in terms of, you know, Sony going for feel, they're nailing that stuff. We'll see. Again, backwards compatibility so far has felt fairly good. I've been playing Spelunky. You know, you saw a little bit of Mortal Kombat 11 right there. I want to see what happens when we get the kind of, you know, enhanced versions of some of those games, to see how those kind of fare. But for the most part, Sony PlayStation 5 is a damn good machine. I think it's worth your money. If you get the digital or the disc version, I think it's worth it. Again, we'll see what they do when it comes to UI stuff, with the things with the cards, with the way that they do, streaming from the devices, which I see also you'll be able to stream in a higher fidelity too. Like, all those things are going to be really cool to see how it all comes together in the upcoming months. Again, because this is basically a review in progress, because we don't have full, firmware on everything else. It's still kind of, in reviewer space. So when it's out in the wild and we have, everyone playing it, we'll see exactly what those things are, and, connectivity between friends and all the other kind of stuff when it happens. So again, thank you so much for checking out our review. We have lots more stuff coming in terms of, where things are going to land, how we're going to tackle some of that stuff, and then, more impressions of games and how they play and how they kind of interact with the system in all the ways that they possibly can. So thank you so much for giving us love here, giving us love on YouTube. This is going to go up there, and especially love on the podcast and for the show. Again, a huge thank you again to the folks over at Sony for sending us not only a console, but all the peripherals that go along with it, and for all these games you've been giving us as well to review for the launch coming up in a couple of days. So excited to hear thoughts about that from all of you in Brookago. Let me know what you thought of this review. Let me know what you think of the console when you get it, and we'll be talking to you all soon. Much love. Peace.